is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Sex Education, Season 1, Episode 5. In this episode, everything is terrible, and I hate it, and I hated all of it. I hated this whole thing. All of it. I hate it. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. Ashleigh, because she is a sweet, sweet girl, warned me about some upsetting content in this episode. I was already watching, but I had not gotten to the thing yet. And it was unclear because she wasn't super specific. But I was like, oh, I think it's going to be this. And it does indeed turn out to be that. So I'm going to just talk about everything with Eric right off the top because I just have to. So here's the thing. It's always it's something that I don't feel like I know the answer to. This is the kind of question that I think a lot of creators and writers ask themselves. Is it more or less responsible to either not depict a very real violence that exists and a very unfortunate reality that many people live, or to depict somebody just existing and enjoying their life because folks from those communities need a break from the bleakness sometimes. This is just something that I've seen a lot of people from marginalized communities speaking on recently. Especially the Black community has had a lot of articles recently, and by recently I mean the last 5 years, about how many movies out there and books and even TV shows capitalize on Black pain, and that they would like some stories where Black people are allowed to just exist and live a life where their storyline doesn't revolve around the difficulties of being Black, about the harsh reality of the treatment that one would face. And even within the Black community, when I observe these conversations, there is no unified answer. You know, there's a lot of people who do feel like, I would like a break from this. I would like to just watch a, movie that has mostly Black actors and not have it be a movie about slavery. And that's why we have mostly Black actors. Why do we need a, quote, reason? How about we just do that? And then there are people who are like, yeah, but we can't deny or not face the truth and show the reality of what it's like. And it was the kind of thing, how many of you have seen Schitt's Creek? There is a really great little behind the scenes, anniversary documentary. I think it was on Amazon, but I'm not positive. About the filming of the final episode of Schitt's Creek. And they talk in that about the relationship between David and Patrick and how they made a really specific effort and decision to not depict homophobia in the show at all. They thought about how to approach it, and they decided that they just wanted this to be a story about relationships in general and how one navigates them without putting that obstacle in the way in addition to everything, and potentially making us dislike some characters as a result as well, because it's a pretty self-contained show. And I didn't realize that they had really sat down and thought about how they wanted to approach it. I just sort of thought there came a point in one of the later seasons where I said to Owen, I just realized that we never see anybody having a problem with the two of them being in a relationship. And it's really nice. And I just didn't really stop to think of it beyond that, because of course I don't, because I'm straight. And so I don't have to think about it. But I was sort of once I stopped and realized that we had never had the, gay panic or any of that you might expect, especially from certain characters who on the show can often be very ignorant and unfortunate. It was a relief in a way to be like, oh, we're not doing that. Okay. And there is one episode where you think that's what's going to be a thing, and it turns out it is not. And so I don't really have a stance on whether or not depicting this sort of thing tends towards being better or worse for the getting the information out there. I tend to think it doesn't do that much good, because the people who are willing to watch things that have that kind of content tend to be pretty aware of those realities anyway. So you're sort of preaching to the choir and or trying to use that as a means of pulling the heartstrings on an audience that fancies themselves as being incredibly progressive. And it's a sort of weirdly masturbatory thing sometimes. And so I just had really mixed feelings about this, because like I said, on the one hand, this is the reality. If you are somebody who presents in any way off gender, you are often subject to, if not ridicule, or if not violence, at least ridicule. And I just can't. I have a few trans friends who are close friends, and I am constantly astonished at how brave they are, because I wear just, some of the things that I deal with personally, like wearing a certain outfit while fat, for example, can certainly attract a type of attention, a very unwelcome type, and it can feel like a risk. And in comparison, it's absolutely nothing in comparison. It's just, risk isn't even the appropriate word, really. And I am always blown away at the strength that it takes to face that every day. The labor that goes into choosing to put yourself out there and be vulnerable like that. And it is overwhelming to contemplate to me. And there are a lot of folks out there who don't identify with the gender they were assigned with at birth, but they choose to present as that gender because they don't want to deal with this kind of shit. And I can't say I blame them at all. It sounds exhausting. So, yeah, so I just, this felt, it was just, I was all over the place. And I would love to hear from somebody who, we know that the deal with Eric isn't even necessarily that he's trans, although perhaps he is, but he hasn't said. He just enjoys wearing dresses and makeup, I even am tempted to say he enjoys wearing women's clothing, but it's not. It's just clothing. We have assigned it as women's clothing, but that's not really true. So, I have to learn to change all my language around that as well. We just really get brainwashed, guys. We really do. And so, if he just enjoys wearing that stuff, it's not even it's not even him questioning his gender in a fundamental way. It's simply choosing to express his gender in a way that is outside the norm. And that is enough. And it's mind-boggling to me that this is something that we have to worry about still in 2021. Who gives a shit what clothes you're wearing? For real. I can't believe that this is even a thing anymore. Like, get a life, everybody. So Ayantu's in the chat. I think you can have both, but we have to be clear about the fact that slave movies are made for white people. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. But at the same time, it's not even white people really understanding how terrible shit was. It's normally white people watching a slave movie and then patting themselves on the back for doing so, like it's an act of anti-racism. That's it. Thank you, Ayantu. When I was saying, like, masturbatory, I was trying to, like, get at the heart of what it is, and I think that you got it. And it's, like, also a way of weirdly distancing themselves from racism, because you can point at this thing and be like, it's not as bad as that. You know? Like, well, I'm not doing those things, so clearly I'm not It's just really damaging, I think, to constantly be faced with a extreme version of racism to compare yourself against, and then be able to, like, smugly go to bed that night and feel like you're so virtuous because you don't participate in that. Ms. T says, I thought the level of assault was well done and the character had a lot more going on than this one assault. Ms. T, that is also fair. There's a lot happening, and I like the fact that I worried it was going to be worse. I thought there were going to be multiple people that got out of the car. I thought that there was going to be more violence. I thought there perhaps would be sexual assault. Like, there's a lot, you know. I didn't expect him to be killed, but, you know, fucking who knows. So I agree that I feel like they did their best in wanting to be like, here's the true reality, but we're going to be restrained, but we're still going to make you feel afraid. And I think it was an extremely effective scene in that regard, because they managed to corner him in a place where there is no help. He's on a street with no phone. He's got no wallet. He has no, like, he's even in shoes that he can't run in. Like, everything about the situation, he is as vulnerable as it gets. And the dread when this car begins to pull up, it's just, you feel sick. You feel, I like felt actually nauseous after this scene. It was rough. And, you know, again, I am not part of this targeted community, and I can only imagine what it's like watching it if you are, and if this is something that you actually fear, because I can relate to it in so much as I am a woman, and we are a target in a similar way a lot of the time, but it's not the same. It's just not. You know, it's just it's different. Not to say it's like worse or better. It's just different. I mean, at the very least, a woman being assaulted this way, I feel, is going to be taken seriously when she reports it more than a man in these clothes or a trans person. Like, they are just they are not seen as people by law enforcement in a way that's really sickening. And the assaults against them are just treated as like nothing, or as, well, then don't dress like that. You brought it on yourself kind of thing. So, I mean, again, women are often told also don't dress that way, but there's a dehumanizing factor that comes in when it's this sort of scenario that doesn't quite happen with women. It's just different. Ashleigh says, I feel like it also depends on whether your show slants more entertainment or education. With entertainment, there's probably a bit more leeway to say, nope, we're just not going to go there. But a show that leans more toward education probably has a bit more pressure to show this as a very real concern. Yeah, I think that's another good point. And that's part of, I'm sure, why Schitt's Creek decided to just veer away from it, was they were like, that's just a bummer. We don't want to do that. Like, the show deals in serious themes, and there's a lot of emotional stuff and things that can be upsetting sometimes, but it's never that kind of story. And I think that was the right call. So anyway, it's, and what's so awful about this whole thing is the way that it comes about, because Eric's father, he's on his way out. His father stops him and says, you can't go out like that. And of course, again, I'm like, oh, what is this going to be like? And Eric says it's a costume. Otis is going to be wearing one too. And his father says, at least put a jacket on. It's not safe. And you guys, I gotta be honest. When he says it's not safe, that was what really fucking got me. If I were to have children and one of them was not straight, cis, and, confident of that fact, I would just be so worried all the time. That's really what it would be. I would, of course, support them in any way, but I can't imagine what it is like for parents when they realize the shit their kid's going to have to face. Like, it must be this complete paranoia that overtakes you. And there is something about his father's genuine concern. And I understand later when he says, if you want to live like this, you're going to have to toughen up. I understand why it's so gross. But at the same time, I can also understand as a parent who feels so powerless to protect your kid all the time, being like, this is the one way that I know to prepare you. And it's not healthy or good or actually helpful. But I can understand the impulse, and I wish that just the whole way the scene went down and the way that as he's cornered, he shouts out, "This isn't me, it's just a costume." Having to say that, don't worry, I'm not really a freak like you think. It's just so fucking awful. I'm sorry, you guys. It just really makes me sick, the world we live in is so backward, and it's just, we have made so much progress in some ways, and then there are things it just feels like we're never going to turn around on. And it's stuff that doesn't matter, and that's what I find so baffling. So we've got a man in a skirt and heels and makeup. Literally, who fucking cares? But people do. People have this reaction that I don't understand. I just don't get it. And the fact that this all happens because he's abandoned by Otis. I understand part way why Otis makes some of the choices that he does, but overall, for real, fuck Otis. This episode just really, fuck Otis. Sincerely. He's at Otis's home at the end with a fucking cut on his face and doesn't even ask what happened. He says in a quick moment, "What happened to your face?" But when Eric is like, "Wait, you were with Maeve?" Otis doesn't persist and express concern and go, no, I was, but hold on, wait, what happened to you? Instead, he accuses Eric of being jealous in this way that's so incredibly self-absorbed and brain dead to me that I had just no fucking patience with it at all. That was it for me. I am, it's one thing if Eric was sitting there and just seemed upset to have been ditched, then it would still be absolute trash. But I could sort of understand being like, look, let me just explain to you. But you see that he's been hurt. And Eric says to him very specifically, "You left me out there alone dressed like that for Maeve." And he doesn't fucking make the connection as to why Eric phrased it like that. Or why he said that in combination with his injury. It's just, and I have no doubt that once Otis finds out what actually went down, he's going to feel like a real piece of shit. But regardless, in the moment, he just displayed such a profound self-centeredness that I was disgusted. You know, it's a really good example, to be honest, of how little cis people get the danger and don't consider it. You know, like, it's so frustrating. Lisa said, I had the exact same reaction. I was bawling. The realization that people in the real world are like this ripped my heart to pieces. Dion says, yeah, it's shit, but yeah, Otis is a kid too and makes stupid decisions. The self-absorption of teenagers is maddening. For me, it was the fact that Eric is black too, that his friend didn't make the connections. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of layers here of Otis just not thinking straight. And it's just, you know, the thing that he says about how you're just mad that I'm making friends outside of us. And I just wanted to be like, well, even if that is why, Otis, why do you think that he would be a little upset by that? You don't think that maybe it's a little harder for him? Like, it just stop and think about what you're saying. But obviously, that shit has not occurred to him. And I'll be interested to see, like, how the show decides to approach that. 'Cause it's really tough to bring up this subject matter and not deal with it holistically. And I really want to believe they will. But, you know, it can, and I think they probably will based on the overall love for the show that I hear from people. I don't feel like it would have that sort of reaction if they had been disappointing with this. But, you know, it's the sort of thing that, like, I'm dealing right now with some family issues surrounding abandonment of loved ones. And that is abandonment, like, of fellow family members and abandonment from friends. And it is a real, like, mind fuck what happens to people who have been abandoned by anyone. And the kinds of messaging that they internalize due to that. And I just really, Eric is alone. He's in a household with all girls who don't seem to know he's even gay, with a father who's just worried about him all the time, and he's like not supportive, but also not trying to stop him, just trying to shield him. And other than that, he's bullied at school and picked on by this kid who steals his money and, like, beats him up a little bit. What else has he got going for him? You know, even the swing band thing isn't super hot. So, Otis, buddy, stop and fucking think. Like, you don't have to take full responsibility for his state, but have some compassion and some fucking perspective, man, you know? So let's see. Ashley says, I know Eric isn't trans, but presenting in feminine clothes in public, along with the fact that black trans women are murdered at such alarming rates, short-sighted, doesn't even cover what was going on with Otis. Yeah. And, like, one could say, oh yeah, he sprints after the bus, but it's just too little too late, you know? And I really would have liked it a lot if Otis would just turn around and go home and ask for a ride. His mother would have done it. Let's be honest. She would have. She would have understood. The point is that they are supposed to be going on the bus together, and that's part of it. But his solution is to sit there for an hour and wait for the next bus. No. No. Go home, get a ride, figure it out. Don't let your friends sit on their birthday all alone, dressed like that, for an hour until you roll in on the other bus. Get a solution together that's an alternate to your original plan. Just do that. And I deeply love when he tries to say Maeve made him, like, go talk to this kid instead of being with Eric. She says, I didn't make you do anything. And she is dead right. You know, she's putting pressure on him to do certain things because she thinks they're important. But if he chose to do what he needed to do, I think ultimately she would just be like, well, I guess that's how that went. And I think she'd let it go. But he is so determined to sort of, first of all, impress her. And second of all, spend more time with her if he can. That he's letting her take priority, even though he doesn't intend to. And then trying to shift the responsibility for that back onto her. And this is something that really happens with boys a lot, is that they will be so driven by wanting to impress and date girls that they interpret their preoccupation with that as the girls holding all the power. And the truth is, you're giving them power that you have. You are choosing to prioritize certain things because this is so important to you. They don't actually have that power unless you choose to give it to them. So there then comes this resentment, which becomes part of like the whole incel thing, where boys will resent girls because they feel like, I'm powerless in the face of how I want to do things for this girl, and she takes that for granted. And it's like, no, you are still in absolute full control of whether you choose to do the thing. She's not forcing you. You're just weak. You're just being weak. And maybe take responsibility for the fact that you're making choices for somebody who's made it pretty clear that they're like not even that interested or want to be friends, and you think that somehow doing this is going to change things. So I just, the whole thing is really frustrating to watch because you know, as soon as she is like, we got to talk about this thing after school. It's okay. It won't take long. I have somewhere to be too. As soon as she says this, I'm like, oh, fuck. This is going to fuck it all up. The whole plan depends on them getting to the first bus in time. Everything is about that. And as soon as she presents him with something, an alternate thing to be doing, it was just all over. And what kills me so much is how Eric isn't aware that that's why Otis wasn't there until the very end. Up till then, he's just disappointed. He's not angry. And he doesn't even feel abandoned exactly, because he sees Otis sprinting after the bus, and it looks like Otis really tried to make it on time and just was late. It's not clear that he was late because he stopped to do something that Maeve asked. And when he said, is saying that he's not coming on the second bus, he makes it sound like, oh, there was an emergency, like something really went wrong for him. When it's a thing for a stranger. And granted, there's a time limit on it. But I feel like Maeve probably could have figured this one out by herself. I'm just, personally, I don't feel Otis was necessary for this little bit of sleuthing. And I think that's part of what makes it so frustrating, is that he's around and it's not like he doesn't do anything, but it just does not seem as if he was crucial. And it's kind of, I'm realizing as I'm talking about it, because the whole thing that goes on with Otis's other storyline, the one that's involving Maeve and Ruby, is that Ruby sent a pussy shot to a kid that she was dating. And somebody begins to threaten to circulate her name. They put the pussy shot out there on everybody's phones. And it's like, I'll tell everybody who this is. Unless I don't even remember, do they want money? What is it that they say? And so the whole beginning of the thing is assumed to be the boy that she sent it to is choosing to circulate all of this. I have to admit, you guys, from the start, I thought this sounded like a girl. I didn't think it was the guy. It just, this is not to say that guys don't weaponize women's nudes against them, because it 100% happens. Like, there's a whole revenge porn industry. It's sick. But it just didn't totally feel right to me. If a guy used this sort of leverage, it would be to control a woman into doing what he wanted, often in a sexual way. And I don't even necessarily mean for sexual favors. I just mean for sexual power. And it just wasn't feeling like that. It felt like pure humiliation for spite. In a way, it just didn't hit for me. And so when it turns out that it's a girl, I was like, okay, yeah, that feels more right. The whole way this went. And Ruby, she's like, really, they make sure to show us that she is a bad person. The episode opens with a girl that she lied to, told her, oh yeah, so-and-so really likes you, you should ask him to the dance. And this girl falls for it and gets humiliated in front of the guy's friends. And I really enjoyed this. The fact that the show decided to go out of their way to make this awful thing happen to somebody who's otherwise revolting. You know, they're a bad person, and you want bad things to happen to them. But they really make sure to be like, you want bad things to happen to her, but this is different. This is over the line. And this is, like, as much as you hate her, it's still not okay. It's really nice to feel like that's being delineated clearly, because there are a lot of, like, teen movies out there where the message is kind of, as long as they were a bad person, you can do whatever and they deserve it. And there's like a whole thing. I'm trying to remember what movie it is. But basically, it's like the popular kid gets drugged and then gets like vaguely gay insinuated photos taken of them. And their whole social life is ruined forever because these kids circulated photos that make it look like they were having gay sex. And it's just really hideous because it's like, not only is it homophobic, but they were drugged, which is like this deep violation. And it's just so many layers of like gross. So, and that was celebrated in that movie as like, yeah, they got theirs, haha. And I really appreciate that the show's like, no, never okay. Doesn't matter how much you hate them. It's really wrong. I was like, thank you. And also, the fact that this is something that is specifically targeted against women gets clearly addressed. And Maeve has to sit and tell Otis, okay, look, you know that whole thing about cockbiter? Let me tell you what actually happened. I wouldn't kiss a guy. That's literally it. He wanted to kiss me and I wouldn't. And he circulated this thing, and now I have been called that to my face by strangers for 4 years. That's the kind of damage that shit does. It's so untrue that it's barely connected to the actual event, and yet everybody believes it 100%. Even Eric at the beginning of the episode is calling her cockbiter and talking about that whole thing and believes it 100%. And she's just like, you won't get it. You're not a woman. It's not like this for you. It's just not. And I think that it's sort of probably purposeful of the show that they decided to simultaneously show two aspects of the issues with sexuality that Otis simply doesn't understand. The threat against women and the threat against gay or non-gender conforming people. And it's just that we get some satisfaction as to the like understanding of women because it gets handled and he sees that he doesn't get it and seems to like internalize that. But with Eric, we don't get that satisfaction. He doesn't even know what actually happened by the end of the episode, you know? So I don't know. I guess that's probably on purpose, but it's just so sad. I don't like when I say, I guess that's probably on purpose. I'm not saying that like, well, I guess I don't hate this episode so much. I don't hate the episode at all. I thought it was really well done. It's just so upsetting, you know? And I know of girls that went through this sort of rumor thing. You know, I personally was able to escape, but it was a really close thing. Because I was like, for high school, somewhat promiscuous. Not really, but I was more open about it. A lot of girls felt the need to keep it super secret. And I was never really like that. I just didn't worry. And I think that was sort of what kept it from being too awful, was the very fact that I wasn't secretive took some of the power out of it. And people realized that I didn't care if somebody knew I slept with so-and-so. Yeah, I did. He was very bad. Why are you worried that I'm going to react a certain way? And so they just didn't really there were a couple times where people would make comments to me, but because I just lacked the reaction they wanted, it seems like they just decided to drop it, you know? Probably also the fact that I was somewhat higher than most of those people on the social totem pole did not hurt. But I knew girls that had really horrifying rumors circulated around about them. And I genuinely, to this day, don't know if any of them were true at all. There's no way to know on a lot of it. But it became just school-wide, you know. And once that's done, when you're in a community that small, it's just, that's it. You know, you don't get out of it. So this whole thing with Ruby too. So the pussy shot that she sent was to this guy who apparently is like a D&D gamer. And it's kind of shocking to everybody that she was involved with this dude. Apparently they only dated for a week. And she doesn't really like to admit it. Oh, here it is. Apologize for being a bitch in assembly tomorrow, or I reveal the photo with your face. You know who you are. That's what it is. So they don't want money or anything. They just want apologies. Which is of course they don't want apologies, because it could be any number of people that she's meant to apologize to. So what I guess they're hoping is maybe for her to go around and apologize to a lot of people and thus reveal herself, because of the fact that she's out here weirdly being nice and taking responsibility for no reason all of a sudden. And everybody gets this text at the same time too, which I always enjoy this premise. It's very unrealistic, but it always happens in movies and shows that we just accept somebody has the phone numbers of every single person in the room. And the photo, by the way, I was really kind of impressed because they decided to, one, do full frontal on this vagina shot. That is an actual vagina. Two, it is not waxed. It is not tidied in a pornish way. And when I say pornish, that is not meant to shame anybody who waxes or shaves. Because Lord knows, if I fucking could, I would, but it's just a pain. It's meant to just be the way that we are presented with vaginas in media is almost always via porn or via a titillating scene. And it's always groomed to a degree as to make it palatable, and pun intended, because we are really averse to body hair on women. It's just this thing where we just decided somewhere in the 20s that women weren't meant to have it. And so all of a sudden just shaving became de rigueur for all women, and it was just unacceptable to have leg hair or underarm hair or pubic hair. And it's really such a bummer, because I wish, this is one thing that I do wish that the show did address a little bit. This photo gets maligned by everybody. People are all making comments about how ugly and misshapen and beef curtainy her vagina is. I don't know if y'all decided to pause on the photo, but I'm looking at it right now, And that is the most ordinary looking vagina. There is absolutely fucking nothing wrong with it in any sense. There's nothing even weird about it. There's nothing about it that is notable in any way. And if I were watching this and I saw people mocking that vagina and it was never made clear by the end of the episode that there was nothing wrong with it, I would be very self-conscious. And they don't actually do that. I wish that they did. It's sort of treated later like, I think all Otis says is like, everybody has bodies, it's totally normal. But it's never actually said, no, but that one is normal. Like, it's so, there's just, you know, and there have been some, like, I know some like art projects done that are meant to depict the different types of vulvas, because we get shown this type of vulva in particular, which when I say this type, I mean like with smaller labia minora that don't stick out past the labia majora. And we think that if the labia minora stick out, that's abnormal. This doesn't even have that. But if they do stick out, that's also not abnormal, you know? And I just wish so much that it was made a little bit more clear by the end of the episode that everybody is being mean just for the sake of it and not because there's actually an issue here. The only thing is that she isn't shaved or waxed. And like, literally that's it. And I just wish that they made that clearer. That's all. That said, I really appreciate the fact that all of the girls band together and realize like that it's time to take a stand against this whole thing. Let's see. Dion says, I suppose you never want to say any vulva is normal. Women would still compare. Well, I mean, yeah, but like they're making specific comments. Like he says something like, what's that sticky out bit? It looks like a micro penis. What even sticky out bit are you talking? Like I'm looking at, there's nothing even like that. You know, there's just like very specific comments made that I'm like, I genuinely don't know what they would even have been picking on in that moment. And I just wanted there to be any sort of acknowledgement that they're just being very purposeful dicks looking for a problem. And because, like I said, I just know for myself and my circle of female friends when I was in high school, the insecurity about the appearance of our vaginas was real. I mean, there's like a raging industry of vaginoplasty and vaginal rejuvenation out there. And a lot of porn stars get like their vulvas sculpted to look a certain way. That is a very real concern for a lot of women, a lot of people. And I just, you know, looking back, I'm just so frustrated that I ever was self-conscious because I'm super normal. There's no problems that I need to actually be concerned about medically. Aesthetically, I'm very average. And yet I obsessed and worried so much about whether I was repulsive somehow. And it's just such a shame. Combined with the whole joke about vaginas smelling like fish, which just repeatedly comes up in pop culture and everywhere. It's so like, you know? So what winds up happening in the end, she finds out that it is her friend, in quotes friend. I don't remember her name, if you guys want to help me, but Ruby's friend that she told her to get her fake ass bag off the seat. It turns out that she is basically sick of Ruby making snide comments to her all the time. And she did this to get Ruby to feel the kind of constant shame that she feels all the time. And Ruby is like refusing to forgive her for this, which, yeah, you know, what it turns out is that she knows Ruby's passcode and went into her phone and got the photo off her phone directly. So the boys that had the photo are the ones that are initially implicated, but it wasn't even about that. And she comes into the assembly the next morning, and Olivia, thank you, Ashleigh. Olivia has saved her a seat, and she chooses not to take it and walks past her. Eric doesn't come in at all, I should mention. And the principal is making this big announcement about transmission of pornographic material to mobile phones. And Olivia finally, in a desperate bid to make things right, stands up and announces to everyone that it's her vagina on that phone, in that picture. And Maeve in the background also stands up and makes her declaration. Eventually Amy does, and gradually we have like every girl in the class, until there's like the one girl that Ruby set up really cruelly, who stands up and says, I have a vagina. It's not even about taking ownership of that one anymore. It's just like, oh yeah, I've got one too, BT dubs. Even Jackson stands up and is like, nope, it's mine. And let's see. Ayanti says, also the whole smell thing is really awful because there's a whole industry of shaming women into fucking up their pH balance. Oh yeah. The whole thing about, like, just the shaming of vaginas in general is just, it's so odd when you stop to think about how much, like, men are constantly trying to get into them and yet have such disdain for them. How? You know, it's just a weird thing to, like, want and hate. And it's just how it is. Like, that's a reality. So anyway, eventually Ruby stands up and says, like, it's mine. But by then, I don't know if anybody's, like, believing anyone. Who knows? And she and Olivia reach across and hold hands. And I really liked that moment. It just felt super sweet to me. It just made me really, really, like, touched, even though it really does seem like Ruby sucks as a person. But I hope that maybe she gets better. It's weird because, like, in the scene where Olivia's trying to explain, here's the shitty thing you said to me, Ruby's, like, definitely not interested in hearing it. She's just like, I'm trying to be helpful. It's just a reality. You don't have the kind of body for a thigh gap. It's fine. And of course, on the receiving end of that, Olivia feels like she's being really mean. And I mean, she kind of is. It's just, you know, like, look, I'll be honest. I struggle with this. Olivia says at one point, I'm not doing it to hurt your feelings. I'm trying to be helpful. And while I don't think that's entirely, really, honestly true, I have found myself saying words to that effect myself in life. I wasn't saying it to be mean. I'm just trying to tell you the truth. And I can relate to just being like, well, no, that's a bad idea that won't work. And people don't want to hear it said like that. There's a thing called tact. And I'm not super good with that a lot of the time. I don't even realize that it's absolutely necessary in certain scenarios. So, while setting up a girl to ask out a boy, knowing she'll be humiliated, is not a misunderstanding, that's just you being horrific, I do sort of get how there will be things that she would just blurt out and be like, well, I'm just trying to tell you, like, that's not going to look good on you, or this thing isn't going to work for you, or whatever. And really to think that you're sort of helping in your way. But I'm giving her, like, more of a benefit of the doubt than she probably deserves. I'm just saying, as somebody who can be unintentionally mean, I sort of understand how that can happen. When you're actually mean a fair amount of the time, it's easy to be unintentionally mean because it doesn't, like, measure up to the other ways that you are. So it feels nice in comparison, but it's not. So, okay, let's talk about Maeve here and her going to meet Jackson's parents. So it turns out that Jackson has two moms, and they didn't think they could have a baby I don't know who the father is or if that matters at all, but he is like their pride and joy because they didn't think that they were going to be able to have a genetically related child. And it's really interesting, the dynamic here, because I don't know the names of his parents, if you guys want to tell me what their names are. But the white mother is the one that's like pushing him to be the best at sports. And I don't know if that's like on purpose, but it feels like a statement. And I can't help but be like, I wonder if somebody was trying to make a point there. Because white parents with black children, unfortunately, run into raising their kids with their own biases a lot without intending that to be the case. And that does not mean that they don't love their kid, but their internalized racism in kids that were raised by white parents is like prevalent. And it's because those parents are racists in their way and don't realize, and they pass on some biases. Saying this is in as mild a way as I can. So the fact that it's the white mother that sees him as like a sportsman primarily and pushes him in that way really, it squicks me out in a way that I'm not sure if it's intentional, but I also saw as probably somewhat accurate. It is, we got a little bit of a Get Out thing going on here. And, okay, thank you. Ashleigh says Sophia is the white mom and Roz is the black mom. And Sophia is just really, it's obviously on her mind all the time. Like, Maeve brings wine. And Sophia's the one to be like, well, he doesn't drink. You did tell her that you don't drink, right? She even brings it up. It's been like, 10 minutes later. And she brings it up as soon as Maeve leaves the table. Because it's like she doesn't see him as a person. She just sees him as this machine that has to be like fed and cared for a certain way, but isn't a person. And it's just distressing, And we find out later that they are fighting a lot. This isn't something that's like unseen, it doesn't seem, by Roz. But he says to Maeve later that he's the glue that's holding the two of them together. And ooh boy, as a kid whose parents needed to be divorced long before they actually were, I felt that in my spirit. It's the worst, man. Look, anybody listening, and I say this every time this comes up, but I'm going to do it again. Anybody listening, if you are in a bad marriage or bad relationship and you are worried about breaking up because of your kids, you are already fucking up. Your kids need you to be whole and happy and healthy and demonstrating a healthy relationship for them to emulate later in their life. And if you stay purely because you're afraid to break up the household, you are prioritizing the wrong aspects of giving them a stable base to live from. Breaking up doesn't mean that your household is, quote, broken. It means that you have realized this relationship is unhealthy and you function better separately. That's okay. I knew that my parents should be divorced by age 10, probably earlier, and wondered why the fuck they weren't doing it by age 14. I was genuinely, at that point, exhausted by it. And they finally divorced when I was 18. But I had moved out, and it was doing me no good. I just had to sit through them hating each other for half my life and deal with it. And it sucked. It would have been great if we could have just skipped that part. But no. And they thought they were doing me some kind of service by staying together. I really think they both thought that. They weren't. I can't emphasize enough how much they weren't. So please, if you're contemplating a split with somebody, I guarantee you that your kid is aware there's a problem already. Kids are smart. They observe. They know. Just saying. So Maeve is made very uncomfortable by them inquiring about her parents and what they do, because it turns out that all of the rumors about her family, as she puts it later, are true. And I'm going to read that scene real quick, because he comes to see her and she basically tells him, they're not going to want me with you. And she says that to Otis earlier. They're not going to want me dating their golden boy, is what she says. So yeah, the rumors about my family are true. Some of them anyway. Mom's got addiction issues. My dad pissed off before I can remember. And he says, so they weren't accountants? And he's trying to make a joke, but it's clear, she's very emotional about this. I think her brother, because she gets a phone call that says idiot brother that she doesn't pick up. I don't know if we know what's going on with him. Is he in prison? Regardless, it's the kind of background that a parent whose kid is dating that person would be concerned. Let's not mince words about it. They would be worried about it. And I have been the Maeve, and not to the degree that she's in. Obviously, her circumstances are dire. She's completely alone. But I have been the person from an unconventional family, who also is half Hispanic, which can be surprisingly important to certain sets of parents. And just some things that I realized in retrospect, years later. Oh, his parents were super racist. That's what that was. But I just didn't get it at the time. And I also come from a household that doesn't have money. And I have dated guys with money. And it is remarkable how completely out of my element I felt when I was with their parents. Just realizing, oh, he grew up in a world that is different than mine. Not just his home, but where he goes to school and the other people that he hangs out with, and the whole way he lived is alien to me because they had money. And it's a really awkward thing because we are taught that everybody's the same, but the reality is we're the same when you get back down to the foundationals. But above that, that's not necessarily true. We all have really different experiences. And having money and not having money are dramatic differences. It's just, I love the look that she gets on her face when she turns the corner and just sees his home. The house, like I said to you guys, when we first see him jogging out of the driveway, I thought it was like a compound that he was staying at. I didn't even think it was his home because it's too damn big. And understandably, she steps inside and she's just like, holy shit. And I just really felt for Maeve in this scene because I think they did it exceptionally well on this show too. This is something that I have seen done before where it's like a kid being ashamed of their background and not wanting people to know. But it's always done by a kid whose background isn't even that bad or who otherwise looks a way that I feel like they would be accepted but despite their background. And the family that they think seems so perfect to me seems terrible. And I really liked how they did this where Maeve, first of all, she's dressed differently and has her makeup done slightly differently to be understated, but she's still got a bit of that look that she is who she is. There's no hiding that to a degree. The bleakness of what's going on in her home life is genuine and actually upsetting. And I can understand not wanting people to know about that. There's some stuff where it's oh, I don't want people to know my dad works at a factory. And I just could never relate to that because I'm my dad was a mechanic and a bus driver. And I was never so ashamed that I just didn't want to tell people that. But when you're I don't know who my dad is, my mom has disappeared and I live alone, that's a different situation to have to confess to. And it also elicits this gross pity from people sometimes that you just don't want to deal with. So I just thought they did a really good job of putting Maeve in a situation where her behaving like this felt really, really understandable and justified. And maybe even a little bit correct based on what we fucking see of Sophia, who sucks. I think that Roz would have a lot of understanding and sympathy, but Sophia, I feel, would probably want him to stop seeing her. I think she's right. And so he comes to visit her and tells her the truth about, first of all, that he has an anxiety disorder and he's been on meds since he was 11, that he vomits every morning. And it was unclear to me if he means like I'm bulimic or I have such anxiety that I am like, I'm vomiting due to anxiety all the time. It felt like the thing that I found weird about it, I think, was the timing. He says he vomits in the morning and he vomits after every match. And so that was why I sort of thought it was due to anxiety, because it wasn't after meals, you know, it was after things that like he feels all this pressure from. So that's why I sort of thought that. But, yeah, he, you know, and tells her about the fact that like his mom seemed great, but they're fighting all the time and they are heading towards divorce probably. And just basically lays it all out there that like, look, I know it looked great, but trust me, we have our shit too. And I just really appreciated that, because there are times, again, where you see this sort of thing. They try to do, oh, the rich kid has problems too. And it can feel so trite. It just really can. But they did such a good job with him. And it feels like genuine issues that you feel in your gut and understand. And while it's not the same sort of fundamental survival issues, where she doesn't have the money for groceries, kind of, you know, like, it's not the same, but it still feels real. And I appreciated that a lot. So, let's see. Ashleigh says, I know it was just a quick mention, but Jackson opening up about purging also really got to me. Okay, so that was how you took it. Because I really wasn't sure. And I don't know if we'll find out, you know, but because his mother is like up his ass about his nutrition, it would make it a lot of sense. It was just the timing of it that I sort of was like, does that make sense? But, you know, yeah. So anyway, I'm over time, but this was a very heavy episode. Yikes. And I just really hope that Otis fucking gets his head out of his ass next episode. So we will see. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap. Thank you again, Ashleigh, for commissioning this. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.